After inserting the article's records, we may move on to see the rules. We have connected the articles to a series of rules, and we have made some considerations deserving an explanation. We want to manage all of the bases using only one rule that we'll name BA, the wall units with only one rule, PE, the columns with only one rule, CO. Concerning the corner and terminal columns, which will have a management of the shapes, we'll use a specific rule that we'll name BT. Another managerial rule will be the one needed to manage the tops and the shelves. We will mainly look into the rules for the bases. First thing to do is to define the questions list, which we'll name variants, which we'll do to create a base. The fundamental questions, besides the mandatory ones, which are the dimensions, are type of structure the base will have to be, the type of front, the color or the material used for the structure, the color or the material used for the interior, for the facades, for the top, the plinth height, the handles. Other variants will follow based on needs. Let's concentrate on the variants for the type of structure. Actually, we arranged that the rule will manage differently the open bases, bases with doors and drawers, bases for hubs and tops, for hubs and ovens, and bases for the sink. We could then expand based on the need for other kinds of structures. The same way for the fronts. They must have different characteristics depending on open front, front with doors and the different doors combinations, front with drawers and the different drawers and baskets combinations, special fronts for special finishing. These are also extendable. The materials. We will begin from the materials because it's the easiest way to define a rule. We will define a series of materials tied to the fronts. White materials, a series of materials for the lacquered, a series of materials for the wood, etc. We'll also see how to create the materials table using these characteristics. Before creating variants, let's talk about the materials. The program allows to define the materials on an appropriate table that we will name colori or materiali, as it would be more appropriate. The material defines a series of characteristics that will represent the object, starting from the base structure of the material. This is a very important thing because it defines some parameters that aren't otherwise visible, but are managed by the rendering. Here, we could define that in this case, the material is of the basic kind or glass material that has determined useful characteristics and are not evident in here, configurable for the rendering. The same is for a plastic or a basic material. However, a material is associated to a basic material. The material's second important characteristic is the color. When we use a normal texture, the color is white. Otherwise, we may enter the color mask and enable any kind of color for the material. The transparency and metallic are the effects that we apply to the material. Obviously, the transparency makes it clear. The metallic gives a concept of reflection. These functions are particularly efficient in the real time. The texture. The texture is a file holding an image. The accepted formats are JPEG, PNG, TGA, and DDS, and the TGA files. We also manage the transparency, which is the fourth channel, while this information is not present in the GPG file. The texture is applied with the scale factor that is present in these two information with an eventual angle. In addition to the textures, we have the bumps, which are characteristics that creates a relief in real time and an eventual black and white representation of the material or the texture. This is when we want a different representation of the material on the black and white printout. If not applied, a solid white color is used. Setting a material using the user's interface. Let's go on to the Materials tab. Here, we must insert a code, normally a number that goes from 10 to 999 for the material. When we insert a number or a material, or we modify an existing material, in this case, a test material already exists. Otherwise, for example, writing another number, no material would exist, and we can create one on the run. The most important characteristics of the material in the classification, that is basic material, specific material, These settings have an impact on the real time and are very complex to set on the rendering. Therefore, we will supply a series of basic materials. These are obviously extendable. The definition of these settings are in the mat asterisk files in the underscore ECAD Pro mat base folder. Let's use a basic material. Let's see how by putting the glass type, some information may have been changed. The same for the plastic and the same for the fabric. Let's use the basic material for the most common situations. Here we set the color. The color can be chosen from a color board, or clicking here, a Windows standard color board opens and we can set the colors in different formats. The transparency is the next effect. We see that the transparency is gradual. Metallic is an effect that sets the material's reflection quality using a fake light. That is the texture that we may also change regarding the reflection of the product. Let's move on to the texture. The texture expects a certain setting or initial presetting. We should have some textures in the catalogs folder. Therefore, let's go inside the catalog. Let's open the photo folder. Inside the photo folder, we may create some subfolders. Here we have created, for example, the generic subfolder. Now, it's not about copying the files list inside this folder. In this case, we have copied a series of JGB files that we have obtained from the generic catalogs. Some represent the solid colors, others are the wood, which must use repeatable textures. A simple picture is not enough. Let's go back to the program. Clicking on the text, we'll see the new folder and we'll see the list of materials displayed in the new folder. These are solid colors. For example, these are wood. And let's take a wood like in this case and insert it here. As you may see, it's mixed with the color. Usually this is not a good thing. Therefore, we will reset the color to a neutral one. It's a little too reflective. We can already leave it like this. Actually, the texture is stretched wrong. This is why the wood we have provided for has a different dimension in X and in Y. Here's the correct representation. We may also insert some bumps. The bump gives a particular relief to the wood. It's possible to create the bumps in automatic. The bumps give a more or less evident depth effect to the wood. In this case, with this product, we don't have great effects, but it may be easily used. Let's remove the bump now. We may also use a particular texture for the black and white in the case we want to represent the wood with something different. Usually it's not necessary. Therefore, let's create all the materials which we think to be useful for our catalog. In fact, it's not necessary to create just any kind of material, because we may specialize the materials in the script and use the ones we create in here as generics. We'll see later on what this means. A wood, for example, can be substituted with several kinds of materials. Once the materials are memorized, we have inserted another query in our query list. We see that the colors are memorized on a line: catalog, pound key, colors. Here we have in detail the colors list. Actually, it's a blob field, therefore not easily editable. To see the colors outside the editor, we can use backup colors. This allows to have an ASCII file which represents all the colors. Obviously, the ASCII is modifiable, and we can modify it from this point and then re-import it in the program. To complete, let's go and see the basic materials in the mat base folder. Let's see how the files are structured. We take the first of the list. There are the files made as mat plus progressive number and the 3LW extension. Let's take the first one and see that for every material, base material, there are specified a series of characteristics that allow to manage the material in a different way. Some characteristics belong to particular rendering engines, but the most general ones are the scale factor for the environment lights, for the propagated lights, for the reflecting lights, and for the emissives.